seek out parent coaching. Setting your kid to all these different therapies is not going to strengthen executive functions. The change has to happen in the home. Parents are going to have to get out of their comfort zone to get their kid out of their comfort zone, learn to use some affective calmness, to model different things to your child, and use some evidence-based strategies to improve things in the home, to improve your child's quality of life.
Welcome to the ADHD Guys podcast with Mike McLeod of Grow Now ADHD and Ryan Wexelblatt of ADHD Dude. Learn about parenting kids with ADHD from two male licensed professionals who specialize in ADHD and executive functions. No fluffy parenting advice, only practical information that will help you help your child.
Hi everyone, this is Mike McLeod from Grow Now ADHD.
Hi, I'm Ryan Wexelblatt from ADHD Dude, and this is the ADHD Guys podcast. So Mike, what are we talking about today?
So we're going to talk about how ADHD is by far one of the most misunderstood neurodevelopmental disorders. And when parents go out and spend all the money on the evaluations and everything, there's still a lot of, really powerful doctors and neuropsychs that are giving really outdated recommendations to parents, and they're pursuing very expensive therapies and seeing little to no progress.
Well, not only are they outdated, but they're giving recommendations that are not even aligned with what the evidence shows and what the American Academy of Pediatrics treatment recommendations are, which is why I have a say, and I think it's a good place to start, that parents are unintentionally misled as soon as their child is diagnosed with ADHD. So I think, Mike, we should probably start by helping people to understand, what is the recommended treatment for kids with ADHD? Do you want me to do that?
Sure.
All right. So for under 6 years old, the recommended treatment is parent training, followed by the use of methylphenidate if warranted, and classroom supports if available. For children 6 and up, the recommended treatment is parent training in conjunction with medication management, classroom supports if it's available, and the other piece is what we would call executive function coaching or executive skills training, which is what Mike primarily does.
So if you noticed in what Ryan just listed, nowhere was there any talk of therapy, talk therapy, or what is probably the most common ADHD recommendation, cognitive behavioral therapy. And also there was no talk of structured social skills training. So I can't tell you how many families come to me that have basically, when a parent first calls me to learn about Grow Now services, just about 99% of them have already been through a ton of unsuccessful therapies in the past. They've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on pursuing the therapies that were recommended to them by the doctors and neuropsychs and the ones who did the evaluations, and they've put in so much time and so much money, and they're still seeing the same problems with little to no progress. And that's really the goal of all therapies, of all child development, is we want to see progress and growth in the natural environment, not just someone who goes and talks to someone and feels good for an hour. We need to see progress in the natural environment. And if that's not happening, that's a red flag.
And Mike, the other thing, I want to mention is I hear from a lot of families, they were recommended not only to CBT, but to play therapy. And I have nothing against play therapy. I have nothing against CBT. In fact, I have training in CBT, but they're not recommended treatments for kids with ADHD. And one of the things I do want everyone to know is that if you ask, certain, or I might say many, mental health professionals about this, they will disagree with us. They'll say those guys are wrong. Therapy can be helpful. So we're going by what the evidence shows. We're not saying that therapy can't be helpful in certain ways and in certain contexts, but, individual therapy or group therapy in the form of a social skills group show no evidence of being helpful for kids with ADHD. So really what we're talking about here is parent training to help with scaffolding and with building skills, and that's where both the parent training and where the executive function coaching piece comes in.
When we talk about social skills groups, there's actually a wealth of evidence that show if you have a child with ADHD in a structured social skills group, it can actually make behaviors worse.
That is true. I forgot about that piece. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think, Mike, before we get into, talking a little more about coaching and what that looks like, I think the other thing we should touch upon is how families have a propensity, no fault of their own, because obviously people want to do what's best for their kids, but they have a propensity to spend way too much money on evaluations when getting their child assessed for ADHD. So I just want to start off by mentioning, I go to the medical ADHD conference every year. It's called APSARD. And this is something that typically comes up at one of the, talks in the conference. The best way to make an accurate ADHD diagnosis is by collecting data from people who see the child in their natural environments. So that way you have data from people who are seeing the child in different contexts. So that should be parents, it should be teachers, it could be, somebody, a daycare provider. If the child, spends time, with grandparents a lot, it should be grandparents. And that's really how you make an accurate diagnosis. There is no test for ADHD, and to have a full evaluation in an office is just not necessary in the vast majority of cases.
And that's so important for parents to understand is the evaluations for ADHD are inherently, this is like some good inside info for parents, are just so much different than other evaluations. Like if you're going to get your son evaluated for like a dyslexia, it's going to involve the kid going in and taking these standardized tests for reading, writing, math, and all these other types of things. Executive functioning is a set of internal skills that involve your self-directed talk, your visual imagery, all these types of things. So when you're evaluating ADHD, you're evaluating a set of skills that can't really be truly tested. So when you're getting your child evaluated for ADHD, it's going to be a lot of checklists that people fill out off of what they observe of the child. It's not the kid going in and taking a test where they get a standard score, a raw score, in age equivalency, all those types of things. So spending all of this money on basically, you're going to fill out a lot of checklists, when in reality, you can just talk to the people that see your kid the most and then talk to their primary physician, their pediatrician, and kind of take a much more inexpensive route. So going with a neuropsych and spending thousands on an ADHD evaluation really is not necessary whatsoever.
That was one of the things that actually came up last year at the medical ADHD conference, was how a neuropsych is complete overkill, to make an ADHD diagnosis is completely unnecessary.
Correct.
So I think one of the things I do want to clarify, Mike, is that, if there is some question about, anxiety, for instance, because a lot of kids, approximately 30% of kids with ADHD do present with anxiety. That would be a time when having an evaluation would be warranted. If we want to parse out certain things like possibly anxiety or depression, a neuropsych would be warranted if there's, a concern about some learning issues such as dyslexia or processing issues, those kind of things. So one of the things, Mike, I think that would be helpful for people to hear is why, an evaluation cannot really explain all of executive functioning.
Absolutely. And that's so incredibly true because, still to this day, most people look at ADHD and they think it's an attention disorder. They think it's about hyperactivity and inattentiveness. Then they hear the word executive functioning, and the first thought in their head is time management and organization, which is so unbelievably outdated, and it's kind of the foundation of what's causing these poor recommendations. Executive functioning are the true life skills for human beings. It is the greatest predictor of success we have for humans, period. So it's not your IQ, not this, not that, it's executive functions. If you have strong executive functions, you have a much greater chance to go to college, be successful, graduate, make friends, keep friends, live independently, all those sorts of things. So it's so much more than just being able to organize your backpack and be able to manage your time. Executive functioning is the ability to self-regulate your emotions, the ability to, motivate yourself towards non-preferred tasks, and delay gratification. Delaying gratification is a major predictor of success. And it's, it's all areas of life. There's home executive functioning, which is basically your self-regulation towards parents and the ability to complete non-preferred tasks in the home. There's social executive functioning, perspective-taking skills, situational awareness. Then you have your academic executive functions and the ability to initiate, persist, and complete non-preferred schoolwork. So it's all areas of life, not just these small little areas of organization and time management.
And Mike, can you explain to people how when we evaluate kids, the executive function testing measures only look at certain aspects? They certainly do not encompass everything that you just explained.
Of course, executive functioning is impossible to measure. There is never, the schools in this country are obsessed with testing. American students are tested more than any other country, at least that I'm aware of. So we're so obsessed with putting kids on a totem pole and ranking and percentiles, like, oh, this district has kids in the 9th percentile of reading, this, that. That's never going to happen for executive functioning. Executive functioning is basically our imagination, our ability to mentally play. So you can't put a score to someone's ability to use their hindsight and learn from past experiences. And you can't put a score to their foresight and their future thinking skills. So there's so much to executive functioning that we can't measure. It's really just about the ability to be successful in various environments and with various people.
So one of the things that Mike brought up was the imagination piece. So an aspect of executive functioning that kids with ADHD struggle with is called nonverbal working memory, or what's your term that you use for it? The brain's mental imagery?
Yeah,
is that what you call it?
Mental movies.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
for example, that's not something that we can measure, right? Because we don't have a way to measure your imagination. And when people get when people get in a testing evaluation, that's not something that we can measure. So they don't know that that is such a huge aspect of executive functioning that, their child might be struggling with, but we can't measure.
Exactly. And executive functioning involves mental flexibility. And the way tests are set up, the kids are constantly being prompted to follow the directions of the tests and do everything in sequential order of the tests. So the way tests are inherently made do not allow for someone's executive functions to be really challenged or tested.
So one of the other things, Mike, I wanted to bring up was that, in the treatment recommendations for ADHD, a term that is really confusing to a lot of parents is that the recommendation says, parent behavior therapy or parent behavior training. And the American Academy of Pediatrics actually left that term vague for a reason, and I'm still not completely sure why. But I think when people hear behavior therapy, they think, oh, well, that means my child has to see a therapist who's going to help them work on their behavior. And that's not what it means. It means the parents are trained in learning how to manage behaviors at home and create scaffolding. So there are quite a few evidence-based parent behavior training programs out there. There's one called PCIT, Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, another one called Parent Management Training. There's one called Nurtured Heart Approach, which I pull a lot from. I decided to create my own because while I, learned about all of those and there was value in every single one of them, none of them really took the executive functioning piece into consideration. And as we know, ADHD is an executive function developmental delay. So that's something that I find parents have a lot of difficulty wrapping their heads around sometimes, because when they hear that behavior therapy piece or that, parent behavior training, they often just associate it with meaning my child has to see a, quote, behavior therapist. So I just wanted to clarify that for people.
Correct. And we touched on the aspect. So in the beginning, we talked a lot about why talk therapy is ineffective, why cognitive behavioral therapy is ineffective. Then we talked a little bit about nonverbal working memory and the visual imagery system, verbal working memory and the self-directed talk system. That's the foundation of all executive functioning. So nonverbal working memory and verbal working memory, visual imagery and self-talk is the foundation of all executive functioning. There is no executive functioning without nonverbal and verbal working together in harmony. And that's exactly why, that's one of the big reasons why talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy are ineffective for these kids, because at its foundation, it is a working memory deficit. So I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to where they sign up for really expensive talk therapy or CBT. The kid goes into the session for an hour and, oh, he loves his therapist. They have a great time. They talk and they play Legos and they play chess and they have a lot of fun. And then as soon as the kid signs off of that Zoom or walks out of that therapist's office and that's it, the kid is right back to square one, right where they were. So whatever was talked about in that hour session is gone instantly because it's that working memory deficit. This is why parent coaching is the #1 recommendation by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Parent style changes, different ways to use language, different methods of accountability, screen time information, all of these things are going to change the student in the home, which is where they spend the majority of their time. So giving the parent tools and strategies, evidence-based tools and strategies on how to interact with their child, how to get them varied experiences, how to get them real interpersonal relationships outside of screens and video games is so incredibly important to, #1, decrease behaviors in the home and have self-regulation in the home. But we know that executive functions are strengthened through varied experiences. What we tend to see with these ADHD kids is they'll find 1, 2, 3 things they enjoy, which is probably their phone, their laptop, and their video game, and they want that to control their entire life. We need to get these kids out and about and outside and playing and doing things and signing up for different things, and that happens through parent coaching. Another major misconception that parents tend to have is, oh, I can just hire a therapist, and that therapist will motivate my child to be on screens less. And that therapist will help my child, do better at school or do things like that. No, you can't just throw your money at a therapist and expect talk therapy to make your kid want to be on screens less. If you don't decrease screens in the home, if you don't increase accountability at the home, it's not gonna change. You can't hire some neutral third party to do the parenting for you.
The other thing, Mike, I was just thinking about with that is, kids with ADHD learn in the moment, right? They live in the moment. They have difficulty, as we know, with what's called episodic memory, which is the emotions associated with past experiences and applying that information and emotions from past experiences to the present or the near future. And they have difficulty with nonverbal working memory, or what we call future thinking skills. And this is why this parent training piece is the evidence-based recommendation, because we have to teach kids in the moment. That's also why having these supports in school can be really effective, because when we can support them in school and teach in the moment and help build skills in the moment, that's what's going to help them generalize these things. Whereas, as Mike was saying, sending a kid to a therapist and say, okay, we're going to work on coping skills today. Teaching them, a coping skill and then expecting them to use it a week later is just not realistic. It's not going to happen.
Or even an hour later.
Or an hour later,
yeah.
Right, exactly. So I think the other thing that would be helpful, Mike, for everyone to hear is, when you guys do sessions at Grow Now, the parents are always involved. And
100%.
Right. That is really different than to my knowledge, what a lot of people who do executive function coaching do. So, often what I've heard when a lot of families have worked with, an expensive coach or coaching organization is that the coach meets with the child and, it's basically organizing school materials and there's no interaction with the parents. And as soon as I hear that, I tell the parents, if this organization or this individual is not working with you, then you are not going to be able to help your child generalize these skills that they're learning. And, to put it bluntly, you might as well be throwing money out the window.
I am honestly amazed at how often I hear that, my child goes to this therapist. I have no idea what they talk about. He comes out a little bit more regulated. He comes out a little bit more happier, but then 15 minutes later, he's right back to square one. So if your kid's in therapy and you have no idea what they're talking about and no idea what's happening, and if they meet for an hour a week and you're not at least talking to the person for the last 10, 15 minutes, there's a problem there. That's a little ridiculous. I understand, some of these kids tend to be young adults, older than 18, and there's privacy and all that kind of stuff. But you have to be involved as the parent. There has to be some communication happening there in terms of what's being talked about, what's being worked, and then strategies to carry over into the natural environment. An hour a week is nothing when it comes to executive skills. So if there's no carryover,
Mike, I'm sorry
in the
to
natural
interrupt.
environment,
Can you clarify for people, when you say therapy, you're talking about therapy in terms of the licensed speech language pathologist working on executive functioning. You're not talking about like mental health therapy, correct?
in terms of like talking about, like not talking to the parent?
Well, what you were just talking about, when you were saying therapy, you meant like for what you guys do, right? You're not talking about seeing like a therapist, like myself, you mean?
The services we provide at Grow Now, where we work directly with the student and we do the vast majority of parent coaching. So what we do is we get to know the student as a unique individual and meet with them for, a short period of time to build rapport, build a relationship, practice some nonverbal, verbal working memory. But 99% of the work is parent coaching. And we work with the student solely so we can individualize that parent coaching, for that unique individual. And it's still shocking to me how often I hear from parents that, oh, he also goes to this doctor, this neuropsych for CBT or talk therapy. And I have no idea what's happening in that session. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what they're working on. I never talk to that doctor. He goes in and out.
Yeah. That seems to be the norm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll explain to everybody. So I don't do executive function work. I refer people to Grow Now for that. But, when I'm working with parents who are members of my membership site, what I'm doing is I'm troubleshooting around the strategies we teach in the membership site, which is really focused on behavior and building independence and around social skills as well. But again, whether we're working on that or whether somebody is working with Mike, and his people on the executive function piece, this parent training piece is an essential part of it. And without that, then we're not being helpful to families, either, with either aspect of this.
And that's exactly it. So, when it comes to executive functioning, it's really going to involve a lot of parent coaching. So if you go and get a big neuropsych, a big evaluation, and parent coaching is not really the number one recommendation there, then it's inappropriate and outdated. Let's look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, the CDC. Parent coaching is how we strengthen executive functions. We have to make sure that the majority of this kid's life, which is with their parents, they're having varied experiences. They're not getting stuck on screens. They're being given tools to self-regulate in the moment, because there's the vast majority of parents that have a child with ADHD are dealing with significant behaviors in the home. That's really what's happening. So they may get a fancy neuropsych that tells you what to get on an IEP, what to get on a 504, but then there's all these behaviors at home. And some kids with ADHD do pretty well at school. They respond pretty well to the structure at school. Then they go home and there's all those behaviors there because home is more unstructured. So the parent coaching has to be a major aspect of an ADHD evaluation, of an ADHD diagnosis, because that's where the progress is seen, and that's how executive functioning is strengthened, not from sending them to all these different therapies and doctors.
Mike, as you were talking about that, what came to mind was how many evaluations I've read over the years, and it's the same cookie cutter recommendations
it's copy
in
and
every
paste.
Single one. Yeah. I mean, you and I, we're not going to do it here, but you and I can go through the exact book they recommend, right?
Yep.
Every single one of these cookie cutter recommendations. And I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've seen parent training in there, and the number of times I've seen, working on developing independent skills or working on these foundational executive function skills that you guys work on. I mean, I almost never have seen that.
These parents are spending over $2,000 on an evaluation that's going to say, make sure your kid gets preferential seating in class. Make sure he gets extended time on tests. Like, that's not doing anything. That's the most basic accommodations ever, which are great, but it's not going to strengthen their executive functions. And executive functions are so much more than grades. The whole purpose of those accommodations is to improve grades. But is that helping the behaviors in the home? Is that helping them make and keep friends? Absolutely not. So these cookie cutter, copy and pasted recommendations are a total waste of time and money.
Well, and Mike, just to add on to your point there, I mean, how many evaluations have we both seen where there's recommendations for social skills groups in there when the evidence is very clear that they're useless for kids with ADHD?
Yeah.
I would say the majority of evaluations make a recommendation for social skills groups, right?
That's exactly it. And no one does a better job talking about why these social skills groups are ineffective for ADHD than you do. You had that great video of the two boys coming together, and he was like, hey, how are you doing today? I'm doing good. How are you doing today? Making them like these very structured robots in conversations. How is a structured social skills group going to transfer into the natural environment and help them make and keep friends? Let's not forget, like, we're not just signing them up for a social skills group to give them exposure and to make them feel good. The whole point of putting a kid in a social skills group is so they can naturally make friends and keep friends. And that's not happening with a lot of these social skills groups because they're not learning social reciprocity. They're not learning perspective taking. They're not learning how to naturally relate to others unless they have a screen in front of them and a headset talking about, what fort to build and what block to lay on Minecraft. It's very important for them to learn how to make friends and keep friends because kids still are going outside. Kids are still doing things. And we can't expect that. There's too many kids with ADHD that wake up, go to school, come home, and stay home, and they convince their parents that, oh, kids just talk online now. They don't go outside anymore. And the parents believe that, and they allow the kid to just be on screens all day, and because they're talking to a friend on a headset or on Discord, they think that's a social interaction, and it is not.
Right. And I think, Mike, to add on to that, I think we should explain to people that both Mike and I do stuff to help kids socially. So Mike has, a summer program. I have my summer camp, and I do school year programs. And what we both do is we take kids out in the community. We go out and do stuff. right? So it's not sitting in an office setting, because what the research data shows is that sitting in an office, clinic, whatever you want to call it, right, there's no generalization of skills there. So when you take kids and put them in natural environments, like I know you guys go to the mall a lot, right, for lunch and
all the time.
And we go different places. I mean, that's the idea. We have to take kids and put them in natural environments where, teenagers would hang out, or where they would spend time together, in real life situations. Because if we're going to work on generalizing skills, it has to be in these natural contexts, not sitting in an office around a table practicing, this rote memorization of, right, how are you? What are your hobbies? Which are completely not organic to the way kids communicate, particularly boys.
Yeah, basically what we're both doing with our summer programs is we're giving kids varied experiences. It's every single day is a different trip and a new experience to a different place to share that experience with your peers. And it's away from phones, away from screens, and it's their chance to interact with peers in the natural environment. So it goes far beyond what any school social group can do or any clinic-based social skills can do, because it's taking kids out to hang out naturally, to play naturally. And that's exactly how these skills get strengthened, not from being prompted by an adult clinician.
And if everyone heard that Mike just said, without phones. So for both of us in our programs, we don't allow kids to bring their phones with them. And guess what happens when kids don't have phones? They interact with each other and they have conversations.
Exactly, 100%. The phones are gone, and it's not their go-to, like, a second of boredom in the car. Let me flip through TikTok for a while, or Instagram, or play Clash of Clans. Let me, sit with my peer and make ridiculous jokes like boys do. So, that's it. So when the phones are gone, kids thrive. If the phones are there, they're going to use it, period. But because we have that ground rule, no phones, it allows them to be themselves and interact naturally. So we have to remember, and parents too, if screens are available to the child, they're always going to choose it. When you make that choice of phones are not available to you, screens are not available to you, after you sift through some behaviors of them trying to get it back, you're going to see a new kid.
Yeah, I agree. And we will have an upcoming episode on that very topic. So,
yes.
So to wrap up, American Academy of Pediatrics recommended treatment for kids with ADHD under 6, parent behavior training first, followed by use of methylphenidate if warranted, and classroom behavior supports if available for 6 and over, parent behavior training used in conjunction with medication management, classroom supports if needed, and executive skills training.
Absolutely. So that's the number one thing for parents to take away from this episode is seek out parent coaching. Setting your kid to all these different therapies is not going to strengthen executive functions. The change has to happen in the home. Parents are going to have to get out of their comfort zone to get their kid out of their comfort zone, learn to use some affective calmness to model different things to your child, and use some evidence-based strategies to improve things in the home, to improve your child's quality of life.
Mike, I think we should do an episode talking about what questions parents should ask a, potential coach or, somebody who they'd be working with. Because I think that's part of the reason why parents, sometimes get stuck working with people who are not effective, is that they don't know what questions to ask. So I think that would be helpful to do an episode. Yeah.
Yeah. And as Ryan and I keep getting more episodes out and continue to build the community around this podcast, you guys will be able to ask us direct questions and reach out to us, and we'll be able to answer your questions directly on the podcast. So we're going to definitely start to take some listener questions and make this more interactive for you guys.
Absolutely. All right, Mike. Good seeing you as always.
Good seeing you too, Ryan. I really appreciate it, man.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
See you soon.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Mike's practice, Grow Now ADHD, please visit his website at grownowadhd.com. To learn about the services Ryan provides, please visit ADHDdude.com. You can find Mike on Instagram at grownowADHD, and you can find Ryan at the ADHD Dude YouTube channel. The ADHD Guys podcast and content posted by either Grow Now ADHD or ADHD Dude is presented solely for general informational and educational purposes. The use of information on this podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, licensed mental health professional, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining professional advice for any medical or mental health condition they or their child may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.